Hello and welcome to Scotch and Watch. This show, as you know, because I don't know, we're nearly a year in now, is unscripted. It's unapologetic. It's basically a deep dive into the media industry, the tech industry, and what we can all learn. And normally it's just Chris and I. And normally it's evening for me, and it's called Scotch and Watch because I drink Scotch and Chris has to watch. But today the roles are reversed. It's first thing in the morning where I am, and we have a guest, Bismarck Lepe, that's joined us today. And you're on from where today, Biz?
I'm in Mexico right now, and because I'm in Mexico, I'm drinking mezcal. And actually, it's a really cool bottle. And as we were discussing earlier, it's artisanal, but it's artisanal because there's like a little painting there.
That's pretty amazing. And Chris, show me what you've got.
Morning, morning. Well, it's a delight for me, Ricky, to be suddenly the one in the evening here. So we've gone with just the classic Scotch.
The Bowmore 12. Well, I am
Bone water. Yeah.
just launching into my first cappuccino from the Sneaky Grind, my coffee shop just around the corner. Free shout out, expecting a sponsorship. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to get to today, because Biz and I go back a long, long way. I think we must be nearly, where are we? What year is it? We must be nearly 20 years, Biz.
Oh,
Um,
approaching it.
yeah, and so Biz is the best innovator I know. Created some amazing companies, been incredibly successful. And as Chris and I have been speaking for weeks now, the media industry's got an opportunity to innovate. This is a moment to go or no go. There are lots and lots of opportunities in the market. We've got breakups of tech companies. We've got Chrome in the wind. We've got ad tech available for rebuilding. Lots and lots of exciting things that can potentially happen. So my question today, what I really wanted to dive into with Biz and Chris is, what should we be saying yes to? What should we be saying no to? And can we innovate? Can the media industry innovate from here? Or is the media industry's future going to be with different innovations with other people doing it, which is a very tricky and painful discussion. Now, Biz, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you give everyone a little potted history of your pretty amazing career?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up very poor in Southern California. Actually, between Mexico and Southern California, my parents are migrant field workers. Uh, and I knew I was poor, which I think is important because
Mm.
then I didn't want to be poor. And I learned to speak English by watching, obviously, Sesame Street, but also Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous and that old drama, Dallas. And what did most of those rich people have was that they were entrepreneurs. And so I've always wanted to start companies. I had the opportunity to go to Stanford during the dot-com boom, so 98 to 2002. And I was going to study medicine, but then I immediately fell prey to the capitalist machine that was Silicon Valley. Worked at a lot of different startups. And one of the startups shared two board members with this small fledgling company. When I started working with them, they had 13 employees, which turned out to be Google. So when I graduated, they pulled me into Google. Was there for 4.5 years, and I saw the company go from about 220 employees to over 15,000 in those 4.5 years, and $500 billion $500 million in revenue to $16 billion in revenue. Then I left. I started a video platform company. Then I started a digital services company that now has thousands of employees worldwide. I've started a security company with my brother, and now I'm the co-founder and CEO of a medical services company. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Amazing. So your interaction with publishers goes far and wide. So obviously with Google, you got to work a lot with publishers, but your video platform company was Uyala, right? Which is how we met through Uyala back in the day. And that company was providing video services to publishers all over the world, including the one I was at the time, right?
That's right. That's right. But one of the first products I worked on at Google was AdSense. So
Yeah,
I land at Google and they're like, hey, we're working on this project. And we started working on AdSense. And then shortly after that, Applied Semantics was acquired. And so we used to have these things called Google product strategy sessions with Larry, Sergey, and Eric 3 times a week, talking about both on the advertising growth of the AdSense program as well as the publisher program growth.
Do you know, the amazing thing is, when you first told me that story, I remember you told me we were in Sydney and you'd come to see the publisher I was at, and we didn't really, I think it might have been the first time we met, or certainly the first or second time we met. And you were saying to me, we suddenly figured out that if it was a sunny day, people were more likely to buy a Porsche. And so we should put the advertising for a Porsche up on that day. And then, you know, because they'd sell more cars and we'd be able to argue that, look how clever we are. And then it was one thing and then another thing and then thousands of things and then millions of things all interconnected that created this incredible machine for marketing to people the right things at the right time for the right money, right?
That's right. That was Smartass. That was the ad server that was sitting behind all of the ad serving. And it's funny, right? Like neural networks were these things that everybody had been experimenting with since the 60s. But by the time you got to the early 2000s, most people had given up on neural networks because you needed a tremendous amount of computing power to actually make them work. And the only two companies that kind of continued to push forward were IBM, which was kind of an infrastructure and services company, and Google, that had a ton of commodity hardware that allowed you to, before the cloud was a thing, have their own cloud and be able to experiment. So it was the first large scale machine learning platform, which was, because it was Google, focused on advertising.
So, Chris, this was the inspiration for me starting my company. I'm not even sure that I would have ever launched my AI company had I not met Biz. Because what Biz taught me, the lesson I took away was, you shouldn't build what you can build, you should build what you should build, right? Because true innovation is making something that no one's made before because it has to happen. Someone really needs this, we need to build it. Now, it's not going to be easy, it's going to be hard, and there's a million reasons you shouldn't do it. But there's one really important reason you should do it, is because everyone needs it, right? So when you're running a business, you've got a P&L, you've got cranky shareholders, you've got a million things to worry about, and the coffee machine's broken on Tuesday morning and you've got a hangover. The publishing industry tends not to innovate, right? And tends to say no. It almost has a default no to these things. What do you think's behind that? And do you think, you know, because I talk to you all the time, Chris, and I'm like, let's do this, let's do this. Like, come on, let's do it. Let's smash this thing out of the park. And you're like, so what am I missing?
I think, first of all, by the way, Biz, you were saying earlier we met. We met when I think News Corp bought Uyala, as in when they bought the service in. That's where we came across each other. Because
News UK, when Cheese was there?
Yeah, when
All
Cheese
right.
was there and Nick was there and Ash,
Nice.
when that whole technology bit came in.
I was chatting with Ash earlier today. And by the way, hey, this is false advertising. I feel like I'm the only one that has taken a sip of anything.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, take a drink and stop sucking up to my mate. He's my mate. I know I've invited him on to meet you, but he's my mate. No contacted him out of hours.
Well, go back to your question though, Ricky. So I think there's a whole lot of work in publishing which is optimizing, which is very different from innovating. And optimizing is, you know, everybody has a certain, there's bits of control spread all over big publishers, and people have their little bit and they can make their little bit better. And what big publishers find quite hard is the kind of great leap forward innovation, which is when there is a genuinely kind of new opportunity. Sometimes because everybody is head down trying to deliver that quarter, and we talked about this before, that people are trying to deliver their quarter in this bit. And actually, innovation takes time, and it takes a failure rate, and it takes a different mindset. And a lot of the times in big publishing organizations, that then gets kind of carved out, taken away somewhere, and there's a kind of innovation unit which is asked to do it because they don't have budgets to hit. That is my experience, certainly, that it's sort of almost the structure of big publishers kind of prevents that level of focus that you need for really big leap innovations.
Right. So I know that's the practice, but it hasn't worked for 20 years in a row, right? So I guess the question is, does it need to have a change of pace? Does it need to think more radically? And Biz, I know you still work with a ton of publishers. What's your sense? Do some publishers do it right, or is this an industry-wide weak spot?
Look, I think every company, every industry goes through a certain life cycle. And, one would argue that maybe Apple right now is just collecting rents on what they've had and the innovation of the past. And so I don't think we should be too down on the publishing industry. Look at the New York Times stock in the last 15 years, it's done incredibly well. And I think that they've
Mm,
pushed the envelope. And so, I am a big believer in like, and I don't know if how religious this thing is, but like that Jesus figure, right? Like the Steve Jobs of the world that come in and turn things around.
mm,
Phenomenal communicators. They can paint a vision and they can get those early quick wins. The problem that you sometimes get is people think about innovation and that this is going to be a 3, 4 year investment. True. But you need to show shareholders, you need to show management. More importantly, you need to show your peers and the employees that you're making progress. And so I am a believer that you can turn anything around. You have to turn it into something new, but you can definitely turn it around.
mm. I think I'd agree on the. I mean, I would have said the biggest leaps forward for certain places I've been. The Times' biggest leap forward was when Rupert Murdoch said, "You have a year, make the Times paid. Like, there's your brief, get on with it." And you'll all be judged whether you're here at the end of the 12 months with a decent product. And it gave the whole building an impetus to suddenly coalesce around a very fixed target. Same thing when the Sun bought the Premier League rights and had to bring a product to market to do that. The football season gave you the kind of you had the top down get this done, but also the football season gave you a hard date, and there was a tremendous amount of innovation in a short amount of time. I think I could sense as soon as you lost sort of those hard dates and that sprint mentality, it was harder then to keep the business kind of innovating at the same rate. Um, but maybe that happens in a lot of businesses. There's a sort of a spurt for a period of time, but the really successful businesses are the ones that can keep going and going and going. And I haven't seen many publishers be able to sustain that level of innovation.
Again, I think it's less about the publisher or the industry or the company. It's you need to make sure that you can keep the company, or at least pockets of the company, well funded and excited to push things forward. Because I do believe in the power of the individual. I don't think that it's the industry or the company. If the company allows for these individuals to do crazy things, I think anything is possible.
Mm,
So I had to leave my job to innovate. I was so frustrated in my role. I was asked at my exit interview, "Why are you leaving?" I was like, "Because I literally can't wake up in the morning and stay here anymore. It's not that I don't love you. I have to stretch this muscle. I have to scratch this itch. I have to. You're killing me here, making me sit in a box, saying no to me 40 times a day is killing me, right?" So I think it's right that the energy exists in those companies to do things, but there's some kind of broken logic that says that no is safer than yes in a market that's failing. Now, I can understand no is more dangerous than yes if you're in an incredibly successful company and you're leading from
mm,
the front. I can get that. But if you're losing ground every day, then yes has to be better than no because it's a zero-sum game. No means you definitely lose. Yes means there's a chance of winning. And I just wonder how you turn from no to yes. So, Biz, do you witness that? Do you experience that? And how do you tackle it? Because you must come up against people regularly who are kind of default no that you persuade to turn into a yes. Is that something that needs persuasion, or is it just somewhere deep in the psyche of the person you just don't need to unlock it?
It's like everything else, and this is why I think the quick wins are important. I always believe that there's a way to a yes, and every individual that you're talking to, every organization, there is a path to a yes, and that path to a yes needs to be in dropping enough hints or starting to make that bigger picture something very tangible to them, so you can build to that bigger story arc. And there are some smaller organizations, some big organizations, if you're speaking to the right people, that they can get to the bigger story faster, but others, you need to feed it to them line by line, and they need to see that grow. And then eventually it gets momentum and people start believing, and it happens. Look, if maybe today, if that media company during your exit interview, they said, you know what? Instead of allowing Ricky to go, we need to promote him to be the CEO. And maybe you, Ricky, in the role as a CEO could have affected change, because you probably would have removed a lot of the people who were that barrier to getting to a yes faster, to build this experimentation culture. And maybe that would have turned things around. But you do need, again, I believe in the power of the individual. We were talking about Apple, but Microsoft experienced the same thing. Like they had built this culture of no and friction. And it took this guy, Satya, who had been running Bing for a while, had done pretty well. They moved him to server tools, and then started working on cloud, Azure, and they moved him into this role. And he was able to reorg the organization to get it to a place where it could start to innovate. Now, biggest company in the world.
Yeah, fascinating. And so Chris and I have spoken quite a lot about leadership in the media industry, and because it's been a tough 2 decades, the leadership have been hired to be the kind of people who are defensive. They exist to protect the P&L and extend the life of the company while reducing costs as best they can and keeping the lights on for another quarter. So you end up with a very short-termist management structure where no is the default. And it's funny, you've now got an opportunity. There's a window now where the world's about to change shape, but we've still got the defensive leadership mindset. Because you speak to, I don't know, dozens and dozens of publishers all the time. Are you seeing any of the publishers recognizing that maybe it's time to move from defensive to offensive, or at least to innovative?
Well, I tell you where people are. There's a real. We talked about this before. There's a real timing point at this point where a lot of that comes out of the fact that maybe 70% of your P&L is driven out of print, and you're trying to kind of move between a legacy business and a digital business, and it creates that sort of let's say 3 days a week, you're kind of managing what is an optimization of a kind of an end game, which is the print world. And then you're trying to move into a kind of more innovative further, but it's a part of the business that is sort of still probably fast following. They're trying to pick up the skills that are there in the pioneers in each of the spaces that they're moving into. Suddenly now you've got this sort of third great leap, which is all of the generative tools that are coming through. At the same point that we can see that the print has in some cases less than 5 years of runway. So I think that sort of three hills has definitely created the sense that for most people, doing this and optimizing for another 5 years is going to get us precisely nowhere. I think that is much more recognized now than it probably was even 3 years ago.
What do you reckon, Biz?
I see it. Look, I really do look at the New York Times, and they've come out with fantastic products that keep people engaged, that move beyond just the editorial. And they realize that at the end of the day, they want to keep people engaged. And you have to come up with different types of products in order to keep people engaged. And I think and obviously still phenomenal editorial, Pulitzer Prize winning content producers, but they need to understand who is their audience and how can they continue to increase overall mind share, time, and then obviously from a revenue perspective, overall CPM, either if it's on a subscription basis or an ad supported basis. I go back that it needs to be having the willingness to change. And if they do, I don't think that this is fait accompli for the publisher industry.
Do you think, Vince, that we sort of thought we would hold up the Times, I think, as someone who is consistently invested in their own direct product, their owned and operated product, probably over most consistently over the last 10, 15 years. Is that fair?
The Times, yeah, yeah, New York Times, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
They
I think,
have, but so have many others. But here's a great example. You know, one of the big publishers that we worked with, um, this was actually this was at Wiseline, one of the first big projects that we were given an opportunity to work on. We had worked on it for about 2 months, and it was ready to go, and it was a pilot,
hmm,
and we just couldn't get the editorial team to use it. And so, power of the individual. There was an engineer in Mexico, Matt Pashinsky. I think he may have been on this or not, but Matt Pashinsky was talking to the guy. He's like, "Look, if this is do or die, we're not going to get the renewal if people don't start using it." So he's
hmm.
like, "What if I go and like actually show them how to use this platform that we built?" He's like, "All right." From there, he went straight to the airport. Like that, from that conversation, he went straight to the airport. There was a flight. He got in sometime around 7 p.m., went straight to the office. The digital team was there, and he's like, all right, so he's like, no, you need to go talk to the editorial team. He's like, well, shall we go? He's like, no, we never go down there. The digital team was like 3 or 4 floors above this other team. And so the guy just goes down the elevator shaft, goes and talks to you. It's like, yeah, so the way we currently do this is it gets storyboarded out here and like laid out here, and then we take a USB drive and move it to this other computer. And he's like, hey, we just built this thing that just makes all of that really seamless. And then the digital team's going to be able to publish very quickly. It's like, oh my God, that's amazing. Taught them how to use it. They published the digital version significantly faster than they had in the past. Usually it was like 5 hours after the print version was came out, and we got the renewal. And it actually saved what eventually became Wiseline. And so I think that even within companies, they may have kind of their own owned and operated systems, but they haven't committed to digital is the future. We need to
Hmm.
integrate. We can be stronger based on the foundation that we have, but we need to understand that that is the future.
Yeah, that triggers me for reasons that you would both understand, which is that I think I was the first guy with a laptop at News UK in '95, and I think it cost me £12,000, and it weighed about 12 kilos. It was like bloody enormous, great thing. It was like
Hmm.
almost like a mainframe I was carrying around in a bag, and no one, everybody just thought I was mad, and this whole internet thing was up and running. And there was a story: Mick Jagger had a love child with a Brazilian model called Luciana Morad, and everybody in the world was trying to find her, right? And I found her on IRC, and I literally did a chat with her on the Mac, on the PC, sorry, from the PC, and wrote the article. And we had a to and fro, and it became this exclusive article. And like there was no mention in the article at all about the fact that we'd done it on the internet, right? And literally, there were people stood in the office staring at me like some sort of space alien, trying to work out what. And we had this IRC running bits with all the different coloured lines of text, you know, with everybody chatting. And so for me, the internet hasn't just happened. I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but it's been around a while. Yeah. And so, you know, the very fact that we're still talking about how we're going to run print for the next 5 years and that's where our money is, right? Sure. Okay. Find a part of the business and put the print part of the business over there and scale it appropriately. But 99.7% of your focus needs to be on what happens in 5 years. And that is absolutely categorically not the case in 99.7% of publishers. And do you not just think that eventually, if you never go shopping and all you eat is what's in your larder, eventually you're going to starve to death?
Hmm.
You must have figured that out by now, right? You must have figured that out by now.
Yeah,
I don't think
I'm
it's, I
surprised
don't,
that not every single article that's printed has a video. Now, the fact that you can create these 7 second, 10, 15 second videos from prompt, if you feed an entire article, I'm sure it could create some pretty amazing video footage that you can immediately monetize significantly better than what you're currently monetizing.
I'm pretty sure that somebody came up with the idea of building an AI business.
I've heard of
What I think
companies like that.
I
I
I've
think,
think they
heard
came out of
tell.
Australia by
hang on,
some really good looking chap.
let me just have a quick look in my bottom drawer bits. Hang on.
Yeah.
There's one just there. There you go. Yeah, so look, the problem here, right? And Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this, right? There are a couple of things that are completely inevitably and unquestionably true. The first thing is that tomorrow is going to be different to today, right? So stop doing what you did yesterday, right? Number one. Second thing
Yeah.
is the future is not going to be print. I think we're fairly certain about that, right? So
Yeah.
that's good, right? It is essential that journalism has to continue to exist if we want society to operate. So that's also a fact. And the future is going to be digital, and we're still playing catch up with digital, and the future beyond that is now going to be generative, and it's going to be AI. And so we're one generation behind. In fact, we're 2 generations behind, right? So the core question here is, and look, I'm cruel to be kind here because you all know that I absolutely love this industry. I'm fighting with every sinew to keep this thing up and running. Do we accept that there's just going to be a mass extinction event and a whole load of them just go by the wayside and we just build what fills the hole? Or is there enough here to save? Because the future of journalism has to exist, non-negotiable, right?
Yeah.
So what's it going to be? Is it a bit of both? Is it one or the other? Because I'm almost at my wit's end of being told by some 75-year-old seat filler the answer is no to everything.
So my view is that there will be a mass extinction. I'm also a believer that there's going to be proliferation of businesses because you are going to be able to start really exciting businesses with very few people, with potentially the power of AI. Look, we've been talking a lot about the New York Times here, but like the New York Times was early to podcasts, just phenomenal. I think that they're late to agents. And I wish I had my own New York Times agent that was really just working for me, taking all of the content that New York Times creates and is there for me. Today, the fact that I log into a lot of podcasts and here it's gonna be the 3 of us talking, but like I have very specific information that I'm interested in. And I think that publishers should be embracing that. They should take the body of content that they're creating and personalizing it for the individual. And if they are able to do that, they will win. In terms of headcount, companies may be smaller, but in terms of revenue, they could be just as big, if not bigger.
Yeah, so I might leap forward. Sorry, Chris, just quick. I might just leap forward on that because I 100% agree with you. So we've talked a lot about the end of mass media and the rise of masses of media, and having agents to organize masses of media for you. The smartest journos that I know, the vast majority of them are publishing on Substack and on other platforms now. And the publishers really need to figure out that the smartest voices are often sitting on platforms that aren't theirs, and they need to find a way to work with them. Publishers for years now have been rich in audience and poor in ideas. The opportunity is to bring the great ideas to the people that need more audience together, right? There's a real opportunity. And to your point on agents, the thing that baffles me is that I love living in Sydney, but I live on the beaches quite far north of Sydney. So I'm about an hour and a half from the office, which means that I have an hour and a half of dead media time to drive to the office. And at the moment, I listen to podcasts. But I don't want to do that. I want to have a conversation with the Wall Street Journal through an agent. Yeah. So I spend hours in conversation with ChatGPT about all kinds of things, whether I'm learning about, the history of Joan of Arc, or I'm trying to learn about, what the latest developments are in the Ukraine. And my ability to have that conversation with a brand that I know and trust, that I know has trained it in the information that it knows from people that are on the ground in the scene, that means a lot to me. For me, I think that's the future of journalism. I agree with you, Biz. It's just if I haven't been able to persuade them to create a web page with a video in it, it's quite a leap to take them from there to Pluto, right? With generative.
Actually, I'm not sure, Ricky. I'm not sure that is. I'm not sure that's a harder leap. In some ways, moving to a completely different format, I think is sometimes easier for ingrained kind of workflow media companies. Moving to something completely different that sits completely outside the workflow, I think often frees up a lot of the thinking. It really gets then into, well, what do customers really want? rather than are we translating, what we did over here to a different channel, to a different format, to a different type. I think on the extinction event, I think I'd say I totally agree. It's going to be so easy for either the very, very small, very focused, very niche organizations to create great product. It's going to be always the big companies will be able to invest and recruit and acquire to kind of move through the period. I think the middle is where you would see disappearance. Companies that have both overheads and relatively limited markets. I think it's really difficult to see how some of those will come through.
That's a good thing though, right? Because there is a ton of low value sludge filling the middle, right? It's bloated. And there's a need for brilliant journalism at one end, mass media, right? So I was with a CEO of a global media company the other day, and he was really clear. He said he thinks that 7 global newspapers of record will thrive in this era, and he named them, right? So the New York Times was in there. He thought that the Dow Jones was in there. He thought that the Times of India was in there. He thought there was a chance for the Times of London to be in there. And all of these papers would adapt to this future. But this mass bloated middle focused on high volume page views and programmatic advertising and SEO nonsense, all of that just kind of evaporates. It just dissipates because that was largely built for Google's advertising model, right? Stack it high, sell it cheap, Walmart web. And what he was talking about was a premium web at one end, and then a massive premium products, but small niche products at the other end, like a dumbbell shaped model. Do you see that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that I mentioned Dow Jones, right? Because Dow Jones has a very big data business. And so, it is thriving, not just because of the Wall Street Journal, but because it is a diversified business. And I think that's how a lot of these publishers should be thinking about it. Like we talked about the New York Times, like they should be coming out with distinct products that allow the business to succeed, not necessarily the main masthead.
It's funny. I'll share an anecdote because I always think it's useful in these chats to provide real insight. So I was in the board of an Australian media company, and I asked the board members, what do you think is the most important asset of our company? And this was just after they told me they were the best media company in Australia, and Google, you could see them out the boardroom window across the grass. So, there was a suggestion that perhaps there was some kind of hallucinations going on in the boardroom. And I just said, so what's what is your most important asset? And they were like, oh, it's our content. Content is king. And I was like, well, that doesn't really seem to be working according to the P&L that we're presenting here in the board. So do you think that's right? And they were like, well, it's our brand. Our journalism leads to our brand. Our brand is incredibly valuable. And I'm like, yeah, look, again, I'm just going to have a look at the P&L here. And that doesn't really seem to be borne out, given this is the board, right? You don't have to say those things. So I'm looking at the paperwork, I'm looking at the numbers. And they said, well, what do you think it is? I said, the most valuable asset we've got is our audience. We've got 2/3 of the nation's readers visit us 4 times a day, right? And we sell them a newspaper at 13-cent CPMs, right? What other things can we do with them? Can we sell them cars? Can we sell them houses? We've got a bigger footprint than the largest grocers in the country. What can we do there, right? Maybe advertising isn't the right thing to do. How do we diversify and satisfy the 600 needs of every person in the country 20 times a day? Because we have the biggest footprint of all. Like 4 times as many people buy our newspaper every single day as voted in the Prime Minister. What can we do with all those people? That's our value. What do we do? Diversification business. Look, please disagree. But I just, when we launched a real estate business, it became the most valuable part of our business because the yields were much higher and everybody moves house. And not only that, but people are into house porn. And so people will go and have a look. I want to buy this. I want to buy that. I want to transact. So the opportunities to diversify have been there forever, but the media industry is rich in audience and boring ideas. And the innovators have left, by and large, been forced out the door. And I'm not a downer on the industry. I think the industry can turn it round if it can just learn to say yes and not no. So here's a good question for you, Biz. Is the most important word yes or no? Is it yes to trying everything, or is it no to not doing everything and being selective and choosing? Which one do you use most, yes or no?
I use yes, but I think it's really important to have a framework on how yes could turn into hell yeah,
Yeah.
or all right, we tried it, but that didn't work.
Mm.
And you know, I mentioned Google product strategy earlier, and Google had there was all this press about the 20% time. The 20% time was really like from 11 p.m. Saturday night to 8 a.m. Sunday morning, because everybody was working their arses off at Google at the time. But Google did create an environment where if you're working on something during your free time and you would take it to Larry, Sergey, and Eric, and you were really passionate about it, they would give you a certain amount of time to
Mm.
kind of build it out, see what would come of it. And you were, you know, maybe 3, maybe 6 weeks later, you're supposed to come back and show the results. And if it looked like it was making progress, you would get a few more resources, and then a few more
Mm.
resources, and eventually it would become a staffed, funded project. But the vast majority of them didn't get past that 3 week period, and they would kill them. They would fail fast.
Yeah.
And so I think it's yes, but a yes could very quickly become a no after a certain period of time.
So
Uh,
you mentioned earlier that they tend to put out to innovation teams in publishers. Have you
Sorry,
ever?
can I just go back, just pick up on that
Yeah.
point? I think it's such a great point. I think that idea of being in being in the kind of, this is the direction that we're going in, so we're doing it in service of the strategy that we're pursuing at any given time. So it's not like an idea that someone comes up and says we ought to be selling pot plants when the strategy is to do something completely different, and then you argue that it's just diversification, right? This is innovation. Don't say no to me. I want to sell pot plants. It's not like that. So yes, it's kind of in line with the strategy of the business, and you're absolutely right. There is the kind of yes. So show me this, and if you can show me this, then we'll kind of move through it. I think that is a real. It's a cultural discipline that has to be kind of. I spent a lot of time, I think, with trying to make sure that everybody understood what kind of things were going to get that yes, because they were heading towards direct relationships with consumers or a growth in advertising yield, or there were sort of things that you had to aim at that you were solving with the innovation. But secondly, then it was that thing. Okay, so what's the smallest thing that you could do which will give you encouragement? Well, what's the next thing that you can do with the resources that you've already got that you can divert from somewhere else and sow a seed and prove that that works. Now I know that's not as grand sometimes, Ricky, as you want to be. You want the bunker buster kind of solution, but actually, it's as a discipline, then being able to sort of fuel the things that were working, as you say, Biz, that then gets everybody to realize that if it's a good idea, it will get eventually to kind of scale.
And here's I think here's the thing that makes it possible. And that person who is passionate about solving this problem is going to work 24 hours a day,
Mm.
7 days a week during that 3 week period. And they're going to, and because you don't have all this context switching between individuals and teams and communicating, they're going to do what a team of 5 would have done over the course of 5 or 6 months in
Yeah,
2 to 3 weeks. And that passion, that's where the innovation comes from. Because it's someone that wants this thing to become a reality. They want this thing to become their day job.
yeah, 100% agree with that. I think also most of the good innovations that you can see coming through, you're absolutely right. You can point to the one or two people that absolutely made that, refuse to not let that happen, and drive it through the organization. And I do
Well,
think,
Ajax, right? Like Google Maps, like it was
mm,
the Australian team. Like they're the ones that made Google Maps what it is today. And they were passionate about Ajax. And we're dating ourselves. This is like 20 years ago, right? But it was that Australian team.
and why particularly them? What was the thing that got them?
You know, the browser as an operating system was still fairly new, and um, JavaScript and all of these new technologies, and they were just really in love with that. And then they started applying it to images and maps and how they could render, and they were just passionate about that. And Google had bought Keyhole, and they're like, we can apply this to maps and make them render and allow them to have satellite views. But it was that team that was really passionate about, you know, the rendering of images this new operating system.
Chris,
Yeah.
we've seen you and I and others, innovators in the industry. Probably industry needs us and them more than ever right now. But there's been a bit of a hollowing out, a bit of a brain drain. People have kind of felt the need to step outside. Are you getting any sense that you know, those people want to get back in and want to continue the good work to be those passionate instigators? Are you getting any warm signals that that might be happening?
I think the kind of people you're talking about are always attracted by a great moment. So, and I think that's what kind of agents and, you know, the whole of the kind of how is the AI world going to play out? That is a great moment. So I think there's also a lot of people, and you know, this is another thing that drives people to keep going and going and going. There are an awful lot of people who are very worried about what happens if the entire news industry and, you know, gets wiped out. You know, what happens if everything that we get is kind of is unreliable? I mean, I think there are a lot of us who would worry a great deal about what society would do in the event that you couldn't trust any of the underlying information that most people receive. So I think again that brings great innovators back to the table because, as you say, they really want to solve the problem. So yeah, I'm getting a sense that it's there's a lot more discussion about what could be possible, and it does free up a lot of thinking about, well, let's kind of put all the models that we're at now at the back and not worry about those so much. Where could this go? I thought one of the most interesting things with the OpenAI and Johnny Ive piece was as soon as they said, you know, we think there might be a different device, and there's maybe like 1 in 10 people in the population that sit there and go, wow, like what could that be, and what could a whole new kind of thing look like? Who are able to then think, what would you build on it? I think that's where I see people get excited.
What are you excited about, Liz? Other than your
What am I
tequila?
excited about? I'm excited that, look, you can see what Fox is doing with Tubi and realize that there are still battles that can be won as we wage this war. And I think with AI, it gives you the ability to take a lot more of that long form content, kind of that original vision of Ubu, and really apply it and get a substantial audience. Um, Look, I think that what gets me most excited is that this intersection of AI and robotics is happening, and everything that we've been seeing in small screens, big screens, we're going to start to see in the tangible world, and that gets me pretty excited. And while for the most part, I do believe that society is going to go through a difficult period. It's not just the publishing industry as we figure out what's going to happen. The reality is that as a society, we've been living in a world of scarcity since the dawn of time. And AI has the ability for us to get to abundance. Now, typically, you know, power, money, influence does concentrate. So in a world where you can have abundance, does it once again concentrate and not get distributed? And that, I think, is going to be the big question that society will face over the next couple of decades.
Interesting. Thanks for that. So the thing I'm really excited about, there are two things that I've discovered in the last, well, since the kind of AI era has started to expand. The first thing is that I can earn 5 times as much money as the boss of any media company by running a Substack. That has been really amazing to learn because you suddenly figure out that you don't have to work for a big company to earn proper money. But if you do a really good job, audiences will find you. So that's the first thing. So I have great optimism about the future of publishing. I really do. I don't think we have a supply and demand problem. There are more than enough people that want to read it and more than enough people that want to write it. It just means that the method of distribution might change. The piece I'm really excited about, though, from an AI perspective, is what you alluded to earlier on, Biz, which is the idea of agents. So I want to have a conversation with the headline. I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but if the story's there and the story is going to tell me in 800 words what has happened today, it doesn't tell me the context, the history, the background, the implications. I want to know all of that. And the knowledge is contained within the publisher and within the journalists that work in that publisher, probably going back 80 years. And so the ability to say, okay, well, where would you say we are at the moment on the continuum towards global war based on the experience of the 1940s? Yeah, where would you say we are? And agents have the ability to have an uncanny way of being able to make that really difficult piece of conversation into something that you can understand. And I think that we as publishers have an opportunity to be far more than the sum of our reporters writing, because the actual knowledge that we contain in our entity is so much greater. And if you can use AI to be able to communicate that to the masses under the brand and with the trust that that brand represents, then you can be far more than the staff. It is everything you represent going back 100 years. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And that, so I interrogate AIs for hours on topics to go drill right down. And then eventually you find a diamond hidden in there that gives you that insight, that gives you an ability to leap forward. But it was never written down. It was never researched by a reporter. They never went and found it. It's just in the knowledge of the brand. I see real value in that. I find that thrilling.
No, I completely agree. I feel like now AI is given the ability for everybody to have their own Matt Pashinsky.
I was on a pod with Matt last week. He's a smart guy, and he has.
I'm so well read. And I mean, I've had ChatGPT. I've had Matt GPT for decades.
Matt GPT. Oh God, don't tell that. You'll wonder. Oh, that will never ever end. Look, Biz. Last piece of advice for boardrooms, okay? Because I think most reporters are ambitious and passionate. You don't go into journalism for the money, you go into it for the mission. But the boardrooms are very different. A board director said to me once, Ricky, how unlucky am I that I've ended up the board director of this global media company at just the point the internet's happening? That was what he said. And my response was, I'm pretty sure the reason you earn the big bucks is because you're supposed to know the answer to that. Yeah, not to tell me how hard life is while we're sat here having a $400 dinner. Yeah. What's your advice to those people, because they're trying to be fiduciary responsible, okay, to the shareholders, and their businesses are shrinking. You have an incredible track record of success that they probably had in their careers before they became board directors of a media company. And so they're trying to protect a media company for the first time ever. What would you say to them if you've got them sat in a room, there's whiskey, it's late at night, you're having a proper, real, open-hearted conversation, you want to put your arms around them and just say, come on guys, I'm going to point you north, let's do this. What do you tell them?
So everyone's heard that story about that big ad exec that was telling Google that they're fucking with the magic. I was at that table at that dinner in Florida when that conversation was had. Look, I think that there's some people who are just ready to cash in and they're like, don't fuck with the magic. We just need a little bit longer to go and then we're out. For anybody that wants the brands to remain, they need to realize that the magic is being fucked. And if they don't do something about it, they will cease to have their board roles and the companies may cease to exist. And in the same way that people talk about entrepreneurs being those people who jump out of a plane and figure out how to build a parachute on the way down, that's what they need to be doing right now. Because they're already out of the airplane, and now they need to build that parachute. Or a biplane or a rocket ship. Like, but that needs to happen, but they're already in free fall.
Well,
And they should know it.
I think they have to know it. Chris, do they know it, or do they just pretend they don't?
I think they know it. I think they know it, and I think there's probably a lot more work going on, in organizations to solve that problem. It's the effectiveness of it. The biggest thing I think I would be saying is, genuinely how much capital and resources and talent are you putting on that problem? And how much freedom do those people have to follow, where it takes them? I think they're one of the things about shrinking organizations is you end up in matrices. They end up very rigid. They end, you have to get 15 different teams to agree to kind of move forward something. So I think moving a lot of resource and capital into places with quite a lot of autonomy to go and find out. If you just set them the brief, what are agents going to do for this business? And I don't care if it's tone, timing, device, what you have all of the different things that you could personalize. Go and find out what that looks like. I'm not that sort of big, very clear kind of separation of autonomy for a team to go and find that out. I think there needs to be more of that.
And I think it's also, especially, a company with an industry with shrinking revenues, they're shrinking from still a very large number. And I think to think that a small project that is, making a couple tens of thousands of dollars or no money, it's difficult to prioritize. And, as most good investors will tell you, first they look at the team, then they look at the market, and then they kind of look at the product, because the product will evolve as the audience or the users take it in a certain direction. And so back to what we discussed, I think it's really important for these teams, for these boards to look at the teams that they have that are going to push innovations forward. And even though they may seem small right now, if they're in a potentially very large market or a market that's going to be very large, give them room to grow, give them room to run and become big. And so often, back to what Ricky was saying, that the no comes in, it's like, oh no, it's not material. It's like, well, it's not material today.
Yeah.
But if we give them the light, the nourishment, it could be the future tomorrow.
And also, you're riding a big wave. I mean, I think that's one
Yeah.
of the Steve things, wasn't it? Was wait for a big wave, and get on that, because that's going to change much more than you might be able to do with a small team internally. It's coming.
Yeah.
Hey, Biz, here's a trip down memory lane. So I can't exactly remember which bar or which city or which hour we were in when we had this conversation, but the logic of Uvu, the video business that I built, was 3 points. Number one, to put a contextually relevant video in every article in the world. Okay, easily achievable. The second thing was to tell trusted news to 1 billion people. Again, publishers, easily achievable. But the third piece is the one that everybody forgets. It was to repatriate $20 billion in ad revenue from Google and Facebook back to publishers and broadcasters. And that felt impossible in the era that we were in, because the volume that we had to get to, and every publisher was reliant on Google for its advertising revenue. And therefore, if it became successful, Google would stop the revenue flowing to it. And we saw some of that happening. But that market's now changed. The situation has changed. The advertising market has changed. And so can you get the video and can you get the article? Yeah. Do people still want to read articles and watch videos? Yeah. Is the advertising available? Yes, it is. And so the answer became no, because the advertising revenue wasn't there, but the business was created for the era when Google was antitrusted. And I can remember the first time I used the word antitrust in News Corp in 2004. No one knew what it was. So I've been on this case for a while. So I am ready to get them to say yes again on all of this. Look, Biz, you're an inspiration for me on this, because you never stop pushing, you never stop innovating, you never stop succeeding. Thank you for being my friend, and thank you for being my inspiration. And I'm glad I've got to introduce you to Chris now as well. Final thing.
Reintroduce.
Yeah, sorry, quite right. Reintroduce. See, I'm worried that you're going to try and be friends without me, and I'm going to get left. That's what I'm worried about. Like, so it's like don't talk to him. All right, you have to ask my permission. But Biz, very last question for you. So we've talked about what the board does, and we know what the editors do. But if you're the employee on the floor, and you've got that entrepreneurial itch, and you work in a company that perhaps isn't entrepreneurial, what do you do there? What would be your advice, Biz? Do you just keep prodding like some of us have done, or do you go outside and try and sell it back? Do you do it as a side hustle? What would you do if you can cast your mind back?
Hell no, leave. Look, I think about time, and I have three small kids, 10, 8, and 6, and you can now see time fly because you see them grow, right? And I always think you want to be in a position where you are getting a multiple on your time based on the people you're meeting, the capital you're making, your compensation, the projects you're getting to work on, what you're learning. And I think, especially for a lot of recent grads who end up going to work at a old stodgy company, they're putting a unit of work in, but they're maybe getting a tenth of benefit out. For me, Google was this place where I would put a unit of work in and I would get 10 units of value out. So what would I do? I would get into the office at 5:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd leave at midnight, and I'd work 7 days a week. And I learned a lot. I built a phenomenal network. I was pre-IPO, so I made a little bit of money from stock options, and my career just took off because I was in a place that valued that innovation, that work. And so I would tell that individual that if they're in a place where they just continue to bump into no's, go find a place where they're going to get a significant multiple on their time.
Amazing.
I think particularly if it's one thing, as in if there's a burning thing they need to do, and the organisation they're in ain't going to do it, you have to go and do it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Amazing. Biz, your insights, as always, are amazing. By the way, you've got an open invite. You can come anytime you want, mate. Just tell me what day, what hour. It's all good. Let's do it.
Well, next time, we're supposed to do this in person.
Yeah.
In
Like, we're gonna
Mexico.
set up a camera, we're gonna do it. So, and right now I'm in Mexico. So next time in November, I'll come on again and let's do it in person.
I feel like this was a much better deal for me than the two of you doing this from the beach while I.
we were going to do it
Come
from the
out,
beach.
come out. The place is big. More than enough room for you.
Amazing. Biz, thanks so much, mate. And I will definitely take you up on that offer. I will be there in Spain. You know, I'm bringing all of my 3 kids as well, mate. So it's going to be like chaos.
More than enough room. We're good.
All right. Amazing. Thanks so much.
I will invite Matt GPT as well.
Bring more merrier. Mate, thank you so much. Awesome. See you next time. Thank you.